Hello and welcome back to the channel for another video. In today's video I'm going to be talking about and breaking down the Year 5 curriculum and discussing what to expect if your child is in Year 5 in reading, writing and maths and what you can do to help them. Just a quick caveat before I begin. The reading and writing programs of study curriculum actually group Year 5 and 6 together. So I'm going to be talking about Year 5 and 6 when it comes to reading and writing, but maths, it'll just be Year 5. And that's important to understand as well, because Year 5 curriculum is very closely linked to Year 6, and there's only a few differences between the two. So when you're listening to this video, it also applies to children in Year 6 in regards to their reading and writing. Okay, so we'll get straight into it. Now, first of all, with reading, at this point, hopefully children will be fluent readers and will be reading for pleasure and will be understanding the text that they're reading. Now, if their child isn't able to read fluently and still struggles with reading, then do go back to the previous year groups videos, which talk about how children should be learning phonics and how they should be able to decode words and think about fluency, because some children might have English as an additional language, or it might be an SEND need. But generally speaking, in Year 5, children should be able to read fluently by this point. Just to talk about that a little bit, I did discuss in the Year 4 video as well. Something I do with my children in the classes that I do in reading is I look at their fluency score. So this is something that I've created, but it's just a bit of fun for the children, so that they can give their partners a score, bronze, silver or gold, as to how fluent their reading is. Now, fluency is about the reading flowing when you're reading it, them sounding out any unfamiliar words, stopping when they see punctuation like commas and full stops, reading with expression when a character is talking, and showing some intonation in their voice, which shows that they understand what they're reading. So if something's meant to be said in an excited way, that they can do that, and that's reflected in their reading. So just something you might want to think about, and particularly if you're a teacher, I've used this as well. It's quite good to develop children's fluency. This new thing that I also discussed in the Year 4 video is prosody. It's a term that, these terms tend to make appearances in education, and they kind of do the rounds, but essentially it's children being able to read with expression, and like I said before, changing their intonation, pace. It shows that when they're reading, they understand how it should be read, as if you're reading for an audience, and you know that this bit's meant to be read quickly to build up the suspense and tension. This bit's meant to be read quietly, and that's what's called prosody. So something else for the children to work on when they're thinking about fluency. So let's get into the comprehension aspect. Now, again, at this point, the children should be reading and having a diet of a wide range of different types of reading. So these could be fiction, poetry, plays, non-fiction, reference books and textbooks, information books. I know some children get really into a certain type of book, and that's fine. You want to encourage that pleasure for reading, but do give them options to read different things as well, because they need that really varied diet to understand that different books are written in different ways, that they're structured in different ways. Not all books have a beginning, middle, end. Some books start with the end of the story, and then it's how they came to that point. So thinking about how writers like to play around with the plot in a book as well. So thinking about the structure, and then also, looking at myths, legends, traditional stories, modern fiction, and really looking at a really wide diet of things, including things like Shakespeare at this point and Dickens, depending on the level of your child's reading, giving them that wide diet and encouraging them to read some of those classic texts also, which you can get in child-friendly versions. So looking at other specifics of reading comprehension, I'm sorry there's a lot of text on here, but this is the curriculum. It just talks about reading wider ranges of poetry, discussing and identifying themes, checking the book makes sense, inference comes up here, predicting comes up, summarizing the main ideas in the text, retrieve and record information, Now, all this here is more of a meaty version of something I've talked about in the other videos, and this is what we use to teach from, um, and that is the content domains. So these are the content domains, and I know that recently people have decided, the Education Department for Education has said they want to move away from these. However, I will say that if they want to do that, that's fine. But their method of assessment, particularly the Year 6 SATs, is still this. The questions are still based on these content domains. So children in their comprehension being able to answer, 2A questions, which is find and copy a word that means, finding words that mean certain things in the text. Retrieval is 2B, so that's answering questions about who, where, when, or what is happening in the book. Summarizing, 2C, can they summarize and, more importantly, order the main ideas, put them in chronological order. And then inferences questions, usually starting with why or how, talking about characters' feelings, why characters did certain things, what impression you get of a character based on their actions, and talking about a character traits. Now, why this is also important is, if you look below, something else I've shared in the other videos is that in the Year 6 SATs, end of Key Stage 2, you can see here the percentage of questions for each content domain that came up in the previous SATs paper. And this tends to be the same for most years. You can see that most of the questions are either word meaning at about 20%, retrieval about 32%, and nearly half the paper are these inference questions, which are asking the children to really understand at a deeper level why the characters do certain things, what impressions they get of the characters. And in other videos, I do walkthroughs of the SATs papers, and I'm going to do another one shortly of the reading paper from 2024, and you'll see me answering a lot of these inference questions. So this is essentially what we teach the children through our reading lessons in school. Yes, being able to comprehend and understand a text, but more specifically around these reading skills. Just quickly on the non-statutory, this is guidance that is just given to teachers to think about, but it's not the statutory curriculum. And the reason I wanted to show you this is because it talks about being able to apply what they have learnt in writing. So children taking ideas from their reading and putting it into their writing now as they get a bit older in Year 5 is really important. Also, to think deeper about books and themes, such as loss and heroism. Okay, what themes are coming out of the books that they're reading as the books become more complex? Is it about war? Is it about friendship? So these are also really good discussion points to have with your child as they're reading with you. Okay, so what kinds of books would I recommend in Year 5? Well, some of these are similar to the ones I said Year 4. The whole point of, encouraging the children to read for pleasure. So, I've put here Philip Pullman books. They're great. Really loved these when I was growing up as a child. And then I've put in some specific Year 5 books. So Skellig is a great story. They do that in Year 5 and 6 in some schools. There's a Boy in the Girl's Bathroom. Interesting title. I've not read it, but I know that the children really love this story in Year 5. And again, The Boy at the Back of the Class. And these stories are good because it gets them to empathise. They are a child in school, and then they can obviously relate to a lot of the themes that come up in these stories. And then I've just included the different types of things. So comics, Tintin books I loved when I was growing up. The Diary of the Wimpy Kid seems to be a favourite among children, but they don't always have to read these novels. It's about encouraging the children to find what they like reading, and things like these Dragon Ball Z comics have been very popular, and some children have read them all day because they love them so much, and that's what you really want. So moving on to writing, and like I said before, this part of the video is going to be about Year 5 and 6 because they group the skills for writing together in the curriculum. Spelling, yes, they'll need to now apply all of their spelling rules that they've learnt over the course of Key Stage 2, so that's all the way from Year 3 upwards. But you can hear words beginning with silent letters come up here in this curriculum, so night, solemn, okay. where you have a silent letter in the word, so being able to read and write these words and spell them. Using dictionaries to check spellings, use 3-letter or 4-letter word check spelling, meaning both of these in a dictionary. And use a thesaurus comes up, so being able to find synonyms for different words as well. But another thing to note is that in year 5 and 6, they then get a new list of statutory spellings to learn. So I shared the year 3 and 4 list in a previous video, and I've also shared the year 1 and 2 spellings in a previous video. So they have a new list in year 5 and 6, and these are the words they have to know how to spell. And they are put here because they're quite difficult, or that they're words that they would use in their writing, or that they might use in other areas of the curriculum. For example, rhythm would come up in music, and community in geography, possibly government in history. So the idea is these words, they should be learning to do them and to spell them, but they should also have an awareness of them from other areas of the curriculum. Handwriting, not much to say on this in year 5 and 6, although they have to be joining now and trying to join with increasing speed, making sure that their letters look consistently. And I'm going to share some writing later in the video, and you can see the consistency, and the letters start to all look very similar. But I thought this was quite interesting as well. It says here, choosing the writing implement that best suited for the task. So that means that potentially now, as they get into year 5 and 6 with their writing, they're really having a lot of choice over who they're writing to, what are they writing for. So, you might not want to write in joined handwriting if you're writing a story for a younger child. You might want to make that easier to read. Or it may be that you're going to use capital letters, or you may be going to use big, bold writing that's not necessarily joined up to grab the reader's attention. So, yes, they need to be able to join, but depends on why they are writing. Okay. So, getting into the nitty-gritty with writing and the grammar. Again, in year 5 and 6, they should be writing a range of different pieces, letters, stories, non-fiction writing, poetry maybe, arguments, lots of different types of genres, and they should be covering. Down here we've got choosing grammar, vocabulary, and punctuation to enhance effects and clarify meaning. Now, this goes back to this idea of choice. Now, once they get to year 5 and 6, they should be able to write fairly confidently, choosing the different techniques they want to use, and that's all about being able to write for purpose and for writing for your audience. That the tense is consistent throughout the piece of writing, and that it shows through their subject and verb agreement that you're using singular and plurals. I see this often in children's writing, and it prevents the writing from making sense. Things like I were and we was. We wouldn't say I were, you would say I was, and you would say we were. So it's understanding which verbs go together when talking about plurals and singulars. So more into the grammar here, and these are specific things that they'll be taught in year 5 and 6, and things that you should be helping your child to understand. The subjunctive form comes up. So the subjunctive form is really good in persuasive writing, and you often see it written like this: if I were you, okay, if I were you, I would really consider my arguments as to why you should practice your writing. So I always say to my children, if you see if I were you, that's a good indication that they're using subjunctive form, and children should be using it in definitely persuasive writing. Okay, passive verbs come up, okay, in year 5 and 6, and the perfect form of verbs to mark relationship of time and cause. You also get a modal verbs, so that's words like could, should, would, maybe, might, to show a degree of possibility. And bear in mind, these also come up in the grammar SATs test as well. So a lot of this here also feeds into that test. Relative clauses beginning with who, which, where, when, and whose and that. So these are all what's called relative pronouns. and we're now using these to add more information to our writing. And they go at the beginning of what's called a relative clause. So, when you take out a relative clause, the writing should still make sense. The girl went to school in the morning. And then it adds something in. The girl, who was very nervous, went to school in the morning. Taken out and put in, that sentence still makes sense. And I'm using the relative pronoun of who. Okay, so that's something that they'll need to learn and use in year 5 and 6. Being able to use a whole range of punctuation now. So we've got commas to clarify meaning, making sure they know where a comma should go in their writing, hyphens, brackets, dashes, and commas to indicate parenthesis. Parenthesis, again, adding that extra information into a sentence, whether it be through brackets, dashes, or commas. How to know how to use a semicolon, a colon, or a dash, okay, in their writing, and also being able to use a colon to introduce a list, which most children find fairly easy to do. But what I will say is it's not about them just using all of these things and saying, oh yeah, they can do that and they're using them all. It's them choosing when to use them. So you might not always have brackets in a piece of writing. You might not always have a hyphen. But when they do need to use them, that they're using them correctly and they know how to do it. Going on, though, to what I consider to be one of the most important things about year 5 and 6 writing is this idea of them knowing who they're writing for, which is the audience, the purpose, so why are they writing, in what context they're writing, and then the language. And before I do any piece of writing, the children in my classes, in our school, we look at what the clap is of the piece of writing. So, context, what period of history are we writing in? Are we writing as an Egyptian soldier? Are we writing as a Roman? Are we writing as a World War II evacuee? That's important to know, because if I was writing as an Egyptian, I'm not going to be talking about or referencing my iPhone in the writing, okay? The language, is it a formal or informal piece? If I'm writing to the king, I need to be using very formal language, not using contracted spellings, and that needs to be coming across in my writing. The audience, again, links to language. Who am I writing to? Because if I'm writing to a friend, I can be very informal, be very chatty. Same with a diary. But again, if I'm writing to persuade and I'm writing to my head teacher, that has to be very formal, persuasive language. And then what's the purpose? Am I writing to entertain? Am I writing to inform? Am I writing to persuade? Am I discussing a topic? This is also really key, because if they know why they're writing, then that should help them with that piece and be cohesive, and then use the correct techniques. Okay, there are techniques for persuading, like I've talked about the subjunctive form. There are techniques to being able to entertain through writing, okay, using humor. There are techniques to be able to use when informing, thinking about the structure of the writing, bullet points, making it clear. So before I start any piece of writing, I always talk to children about this when it comes to what we're supposed to be doing. So let's have a look at a few pieces of writing. And again, I apologize for the quality. I've just pulled these from different places, different schools, and some of them from my own. So I'll read you them out and I can try and unpick some of the things I've talked about. So write a balanced argument independently. So this is likely to be a formal piece of writing. So we should see formal writing. We shouldn't see contracted spellings very much, depending though on who we're writing to. Okay, we should see some persuasive language possibly, and then some of the things that I've discussed. So the reason for this argument is to decide whether William Shakespeare's plays should be taught in primary schools. Some people think that this should be taught because it's important to Warwick history. It's very fun to learn, and it teaches us about how plays used to be like. However, other people think that it should not be taught because it can be hard to understand. It is sexist, I think that says, and there can be loads of violence. Now, interestingly enough, this doesn't sound very formal. I've got words like loads, there are contracted spellings, so I would question the formality of this piece. But generally speaking, the introduction is fit for purpose. It's telling me what the writing is about. They've used some apostrophe possession correctly. They've got some conjunctions in there. Capitalization is there. They've got some modal verbs there. Firstly, by teaching Shakespeare, it will teach children about how plays used to be like. For example, children would see older plays, and some people make the plays very child-friendly, which means younger children can watch them. So there you've got the use of a relative pronoun, which is which we will be looking for in Year 5 writing. So just to bear in mind, this is Year 5 writing, not Year 6. So there are some inaccuracies, and by the time they get to Year 6, I would expect them to change those. Okay, let's have a look at another piece. This one is about training a dragon, and it's based on the Cressida Cowell book of How to Train Your Dragon. I think it's an information text. That's the purpose of it. Even though it's made of ice, it breathes fire. The ice is just to keep it cool. So we've got use of a dash there before a bit more on that sentence. It is known for being smart, comma, which means that they can solve mathematical equations, semicolon, being very loud, which isn't good for us sensitive ears. They can be very aggressive, which means that they are not recommended for children 3 and under, and very good at making ice palaces and sculptures. So here you can see them attempting to use semicolons. We've got some attempts we've got use of relative clause, relative pronouns. Not always 100% accurate. Again, this is Year 5 writing. I would expect that to be a bit more accurate in Year 6. And also the use of semicolons. I think maybe this was a bit of overuse here. The purple predator is purple, comma, energetic, and is found in England. They are okay around the children and are brilliant hunters. They're tiny, so you can only need a small cave. They can breathe fire and ice, which means they are brilliant for battles. Again, we've got the use of which as a relative clause, relative pronoun there to add more detail. We've got some contracted spelling as well. Training your dragon. So you can see they've made some decisions about structure here because they've ordered these points, okay, and they've decided to do that because they thought it was more clear. You've got some sort of time front adverbial to begin with. Also, additionally, next, lastly, in conclusion, you need to be extremely smart and very brave. If you track your dragon properly, you will have a fighter and a trustworthy companion. This is the subjunctive if you, okay, I think this is them using the subjunctive here as well. But generally speaking, the writing makes sense. Okay, that's that cohesion, and the purpose is there. They're writing to train a dragon. You can tell that that's what they're supposed to be writing about. And at no point as a reader do I feel kicked out, like it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all, and I feel like I'm lost because that would give you an indication that they're not writing at the correct level. Finally, this story about Theseus and the Minotaur. And they were retelling a myth in the first person. The massive labyrinth door screeches shut behind us as we enter. So the word screeches shut, that idea that you're choosing to use a specific word, not just closing, but screeching, adds to the meaning and the suspense of the story. Next to me, 7 boys and 7 girls quiver with fear. Lovely turn of phrase here. This is also the foolish king Minos gets revenge for his dead son. In my clenched fists I hold an enchanted gleaming thread and a deadly sharp dagger. They've used an here before enchanted, which is correct. The poor innocent weeping children are huddling together. They've got a good use here of expanded noun phrase. And I wouldn't say overly use. It really sort of describes what their children are like. Do not worry, children, I will slay this awful creature, I say, holding my sword in the air. Correct use of speech. So this is a much stronger piece, and generally children who are writing stories, that tends to be a genre that they're more confident and comfortable in. But I love the way that this child is using the verbs, I tighten my grip, rather than just I held the sword. So I turn to a corner, comma, and it's not a dead. Okay, so the use of a comma here has been correctly used. got some onomatopoeia down here. Bang, thump, bang. Okay, so yeah, you get the idea. Another piece of writing. Again, you can see that they're understanding of the purpose of this. They're building up the suspense and tension. They're using those verbs for a purpose, and they're writing a story to entertain. So there's some examples of Year 5 writing. Now I move on to maths, and in Year 5, this is more Year 5 than it's not Year 5 and 6, just Year 5, because there's so much that comes up in Year 6 that they couldn't group those curriculums together. Here we've got reading numbers to at least 1 million, and them knowing the value of each digit, so that will be 100,000s and then millions. Count forwards and backwards through negative numbers, and again this idea of rounding comes up. This time we're rounding to 1 million, but the rule still applies. So in different schools they learn different things, but when the number is 4 or less, let it rest. 5 or more, raise the score. And here's an example at the bottom. If you were rounding the number 65, because in the ones, if we're rounding to the nearest 10, we look at the number before, which is the ones. This 5 here tells that we need to round up to 70. If it was 64, I would round that down to 60. So them understanding how to round now up to 1 million. Roman numerals comes up again. I would say it's not that important. It's not a huge part of the curriculum. There are other things that are more important, but it does come up here, and they do need to recognize Roman numerals to 1,000. Addition and subtraction. In Year 5, it's all about going beyond 4-digit numbers now. Year 4 was 4-digit numbers. I like to say Year 5 is 5-digit numbers, but it's also adding and subtracting 6-digit numbers also. Using the formal written method, so I would say the column method would be what they were using now at this point. And then solving multi-step problems in context. So, a problem that's asking them to do a few different things, not just add, but maybe add, then subtract. Multiplication, division, there's a lot to get our teeth into here. First of all, that they're able to understand what multiples and factors are and the difference between them, and then understanding how to identify common factors. Common multiples, it doesn't say there, but I know that that's something you need to do in Year 6. Knowing what a prime number is, a number that will only divide by 1 and itself. Okay, here are some examples: 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19. So knowing prime numbers and why they're primes. Being able to multiply a 4-digit number by a 1-digit and a 2-digit number. So that's really long multiplication now, using that formal written method. The same with divide. Being able to divide 4 digits with 1-digit numbers. So that would be your bus stop method now. Multiply whole numbers and those involving decimals by 10, 100, and 1,000. I'll talk about that in a minute. Square numbers and cube numbers. So a square number is when you multiply a number by itself. So 2 times 2 is 4. So 4 is a square number. 3 times 3 is 9. So 9 is a square number. And we go on. And then a cube number is multiplying it 3 times. So 3 times 3 times 3 will be 27. 3 times 3 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. So them understanding those. But again, it's all about multiplying numbers, using their times tables, and going beyond 4-digit numbers. And like I said, them knowing how to multiply and divide by 10, 100, and 1,000. I mentioned this in the Year 4 video, and I want to talk about it again because it's so important. They need to understand that, when you're dividing by 10, a number's getting smaller, and it can go below the decimal point. And when divided by 10, the number's due 1 jump to the right. Divided by 100, 2 jumps to the right. Multiplying by 10, 1 jump to the left. Multiply by 100 or 1,000, you're going left, either 2 spaces or 3 spaces. So to give you an example, if I did 26 times by 100, the 2 would do 2 jumps forward, 1, 2, and will become in the thousands column, and the 6 would do 2 jumps forward, 1, 2, would now be in the hundreds column. So 26 times 100 will be 2,600. And the same going backwards. If I were to divide 26 by 10, 1 jump to the right, the 6 would come into the tenths, and the 2 would do 1 jump to the right into the ones, giving me 2.6. So they really, really need to know this. It's so important. It comes up in the SATs. It's a really important mathematical concept for them to grasp. Fractions, another meaty one now, and it really gets complicated as you get into year 5 and 6. So there's lots to learn, lots of different methods. I'm not going to go into all of them now. Please see the channel for more videos on how to solve different fractions questions. But just to summarize here, they need to compare and order fractions with denominators whose denominators are multiples of the same number. They need to know what a mixed number fraction is and an improper fraction and be able to convert from one to the other. So here I've got an example. Mixed number is a whole number and a fraction, so 2 3/4. An improper is where the numerator is bigger than the denominator. We've got 11/4. To go between them, to convert, you would do 2 times the denominator, 2 times 4, which is 8, and then you would add the numerator 3. 8 add 3 is 11, and you can see how that becomes 11/4. To go the other way, this line here means divide, so you do 11 divided by 4, and you should get 2 and 3 remaining, which would be 2 wholes and 3/4. So knowing how to do that, knowing how to add fractions with the same denominator, multiply proper fractions and mixed number by whole numbers, read and write decimal numbers as fractions. So again, knowing these, a half is 0.5, a quarter is 0.25, 3/4 is 0.75, but then also understanding that we've got a decimal here, 0.71 will be written as 71 hundredths as a fraction. So understanding that. The percentage symbol comes up in year 5, knowing what percent means out of 100, being able to write percentages as fractions. So again, a half is 50%, a quarter 25%, 3/4 25%, and then also knowing the equivalent percentages for a fifth, 2/5, and 4/5. So what is a fifth as a percentage? 20%. So 2/5 would be 40%, 4/5 would be 80%. Okay, so them knowing that also. Measurement, a couple of things in measurement comes up that are different. So converting between these different measurements, for example, kilometers and meters, centimeters and millimeters, liters and milliliters. So to go from liters to milliliters, you times by 1,000. To go from millimeters to liters, you divide by 1,000. And knowing the different conversions, they will be doing this in school, but have a look at that, see if your child understands it. Perimeter of rectilinear shapes, and also area of rectilinear shapes. When I say rectilinear shapes, I mean things like this. So you've got 2 rectangles, and they would need to work out the area. Now, how they would do that is to split them up. So then you would work out 3 times 5, which is 15. So 15 centimeter squares for this part. And then you would do 4, add 3, which is 7, and then times that by 3. 7 3s are 21. So that bit would be 21, and that would be 15, and you'd add them. And then working out the perimeter would be to add up all the sides of that shape there. So being able to do that in year 5, and converting between units of time between 12 and 24-hour clocks, and then just using those things to solve problems. Geometry, positions, properties of shape. So 3D shapes and 2D shapes come up again. I feel like that they come up every year, all the way from year 2. So if they can learn them early, it's going to help them because they come up all the time. Angles, we had acute and obtuse, and right angles in year 4. We're now introduced to reflex. Reflex is angles that are more than 180, as you can see down here. Obtuse is more than 90 but less than 180, and acute is less than 90. Knowing about turns, and a whole turn is 360 degrees. Counting in 90s to work out a turn, and then being able to find angles, missing angles based on what you know about a shape. So they'll learn that the angles inside a rectangle like this or a square add up to 360 because you've got 4 right angles. But if you had 31 here and they asked to work out this missing one, 90 take away 31 would give you the answer. Okay, so being able to do that as well comes up in year 5. Finally then, position and direction. You've got the words reflection and translation that come up. Here, reflecting a shape, they need to be able to do that in a line of symmetry and to translate it. Never mind rotation and dilation. They're just part of this image, but reflection and translation they will need to know about. Statistics, they'll need to be able to solve problems and get information from a line graph, and also to take information from timetables, which we don't use that often these days. Everything's worked out digitally using maps and apps, but they still need to be able to read a timetable according to the curriculum. Thanks for watching, guys. There's quite a lot of information there. I hope that I was able to summarize some of the main ideas that come into the Year 5 curriculum. I do have more videos on the channel that talk about how to solve specific fractions questions, and I have walkthroughs of the different papers that they do in the Year 6 SAT, so please check them out. I will be doing more walkthroughs. I'll do all the 2024 papers for Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2 coming up shortly, so stay tuned for those. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like, and if you're not subscribed, please subscribe to the channel because it really supports these videos. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.